Welcome back to Unseen Impact, where we explore the deeper effects of law, policy, and the personal experience, often where you'd least expect them. I'm your host, Rory Pendergast, attorney at Rory Law. Today, we're discussing the Technology Reform and Access to Crime Evidence, also known as TRACE Act. This bill represents a modern response to a modern problem: how we access evidence in a world dominated by smartphones, GPS trackers, and digital data. As our technology gets smarter, so must our legal system, and this bill, introduced by Assemblymember Alvarez, does just that. Whether it's a grieving family trying to unlock a phone to find answers, or a stalking victim discovering an unwanted tracking device on their car, this bill gives law enforcement the tools to act quickly and responsibly. But it also raises important questions about privacy, due process, and the role of tech in our legal system. That's why I'm honored to be joined today by Assemblymember David Alvarez, the author of this legislation, to talk about what led to the bill, how it works, and what it means for our communities and the courts. David represents California's 80th Assembly District. He's a former San Diego City Council member, a lifelong advocate for working families, and a leading voice on housing, education, and environmental justice. And with the TRACE Act, he's helping reshape how our legal system treats evidence, truth, and accountability. Well, thank you for being here, David. We've known each other for a number of years, so it's always good to see you, and always good to sit down and talk about kind of what you're going.
It's great to see you as well. It's tough with the job that I have now. I'm in Sacramento Monday through Thursday, so it's tough to see old friends. It's great to see you.
Yeah. So you were in the city council, now you're assembly member. A number of years ago I found this out, but how many assembly members are there?
And what is an assembly member? Right? 'Cause you can ask that too. Nobody knows what it is. It's the House of Representatives in the state.
Yeah.
That's what the assembly is. It's just called the assembly instead of House of Representatives. In other states, by the way, it is called the House of Representatives. And you have state representatives and you have your federal representatives. And so we are 80 members of the assembly. We each represent about 500,000 people.
Okay.
Because there's 40 million people in the state. And there's 80 of us, and I happen to represent the southern most corner of California, southwestmost corner here in San Diego.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. And so from what I understand, you guys, it's either how many bills are you supposed to sign on to a year, or is it suggested, or is there a number? Is there a quota that you have to meet?
No, but there are rules that we adopt in the House, and we used to be able to present up to 50 bills, each one of us, during a 2-year legislative session.
That's a lot.
That is a lot of bills.
I mean, I don't have my calculator on me, but 50 times 80. It's a lot. Even if you divide that by 2, right? It's still a lot.
No, and they were being maximized by every single one. So we would get to 3,000 bills. That's just in the assembly. We are bicameral, so we also have a Senate, state Senate, and they can do the same thing. So we're talking about, like, we used to see roughly about 5,000 potential bills being introduced every year. Now this year, both the Senate and the Assembly adopted rules that only allowed 35 bills, which is still quite a high number of bills, but only 35 could be introduced in the 2-year session, which is this is the first year, and then next year combined only 35 bills.
And so I guess what that's got to do is it really makes you think about what it is that you want, and then the other aspect is what I'm kind of getting at with this is, if you're going to be out, there's no way you can go talk about 50 bills in 2 years that you've got going, or even 35 bills that you've got going on. But we're here today to talk about this bill.
Yeah.
So why? Why are we here to talk about this bill?
Well, we're talking about this bill because it's caught some interest. But, the way I look at introducing legislation and bills is I'm elected to represent a community.
Yeah.
And I really see myself as bringing forward ideas for legislation for new laws, or to eliminate laws, because I've done that too, that are on the books that are no longer useless. In this case, it's to amend or to change an existing law, which has to do with electronic records.
So now tell me about that. What was the law, or is the law that's there that this is going to amend? Yeah,
so in about 10 years ago, we approved what was called CalECPA, the California Electronics Communications Privacy Act, to make sure that particularly law enforcement did not have access to specific electronic records that were personal and that should not just be willy-nilly accessed anytime that someone wanted to look into your activities, what you were doing, and done for really the right reasons. As technology has evolved and changed, we use electronic methods a lot more, and so we decided in California, the legislature at the time approved CalECPA, and it's been in the books ever since. Since then, technology has changed a little bit more. And so what we're talking about today is this very, very limited type of technology that gets used, which is surveillance devices, spy cameras, tracking devices, which were not really a thing when this was first thought of a few years ago. And now they've become a thing. They become a problem. And that's what this bill is about.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, 10 years ago, from a technology standpoint, that's like 1,000 years ago, right? I mean, it is so much different. Look about these AirTags, how easy it is to go. Think about even like your Ring cameras, your surveillance there, what has changed in the 10 years. Yeah. And so specifically, what is it what are the minor changes that the Trace Act does or is going to do?
Yeah, so very specifically, it would allow police, if you're a victim in your home.
And we're talking criminal victim.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. You're a victim of someone that is either spying you because you identify this device in your home, an event in the bathroom, anywhere in your home or in your car, or you find a tracking device in your car or in your luggage, as unfortunately one of the members of my staff that I know actually had a tracking device when she was on a trip that was placed in her bag.
Somebody dropped it?
Yes.
Oh, that's creepy.
And so anytime you find that you'd be able to turn that over to the police and say, this does not belong to me. I have high suspicion that someone is tracking me or someone is watching me, that the police would then have access to be able to use any information associated with that device to help potentially solve that crime. Today, what happens is police may have access to that, and they usually do get access to that, but they have to go through a warrant process, which in some cases can take only a few hours, but in some cases it may take longer for any number of reasons. The court may be backed up or anything like that. And so this would say you have authority that if the victim who has it on their personal property, so I can't say like, oh, out there someone's got this device. No, it's got to be something within your property. You can give that access to police and say, please search it.
So you're saying right now, if I have either in my house or I have some luggage or I have something that's my personal property and somebody drops some sort of tracking device, whether it be audio, video, or just to physically track where I'm going, I have to go or I have to ask the police to get a warrant.
That is correct.
To find out where that's coming from?
That's correct.
That's a little odd. So that
was what CalECPA was about. It was about protecting, because we don't want abuse of use of information either, right? And so again, because technology, as you said, changes, a million times over every several years, it's hard to keep track with what changes have occurred. We were talking about cell phones, and they were flip phones probably at that time, right? Not even smartphones. And so things have really changed.
Yeah. So then let me ask you this one. How is it that you've signed on to this one? I mean, whether maybe it just naturally or inherently got traction, you didn't kind of expect it, but what was there something that happened that made you think, hey, there's an issue and I've got to fix, and this is what can fix it? So
that's what I sort of started telling you about. Like the ideas that I sort of take on as bills are things that I either read about. I read a lot of articles about what's happening, obviously, throughout the world and the state and in the country. And so some of those ideas happen that way. For example, we had a bill on banning cell phones use in schools. That came from me being a parent. I have a middle schooler, read all the research. The Surgeon General talked about the impacts of social media to children. And so that is what drove sort of that decision. In this case, what happened is I was presented with this idea as, this is happening. People are being spied, and we've heard about incidents that were occurring. And unfortunately, you hear more and more about those incidents. And then you sort of lay on top of that I'm a father of a young girl who's in middle school, now in high school, actually. My son's also going to middle school. And so the fact that this could be used to potentially harm, your own children, you try to sort of find ways to prevent that. And it really, most of the work I've done in public service has been around how do I, from my lived experience, how can I make it better for others? And in this case, want to make sure that children and certainly young women aren't exposed, because they're the ones who unfortunately are being targeted the most.
Absolutely. And now, I can imagine anything when you're talking about electronic data, you're going to have some kickback no matter what. But this seems to have kind of breezed through the assembly.
Not breezed through, but it has gotten through. There have been some concerns from some folks that we should still require the warrant process because potentially it could lead to investigators or police having information perhaps of someone that they should have no access to.
Yeah.
So that's been the only slight disagreement with some folks, that they believe that they should just not have access to this. It's a difference of opinion. That's what really, this debates are about, and legislating and writing laws are about debates. And I firmly believe that if you're a victim, if you find this in your own property and it doesn't belong to you, you've essentially, the property has been abandoned by the person who abandoned it. And so now it's no longer their right to protect. And so the difference of opinion there.
And that's kind of what I want to focus in, because it is kind of, it's this wild sort of concept. Again, very limited from what I'm hearing, right? So you have the protections out there, and then this is just one little sliver that's just trying to keep pace with time as it goes on. And essentially you're saying, I find something foreign in my stuff, my property, and this just allows me a little bit extra power to find out what it is, who put it there, and why it's there.
That's absolutely what it does. And why that's critical is because, and the opposition says, well, you can still have access to it. And they're correct. Eventually, police will get a warrant.
Yeah.
There's been no real case where that has not happened. But as technology and those who use it get smarter about how to perhaps use some method to block the access of the information that's there. This is really about bringing justice to the victim. Now, imagine if someone has a spy camera in their personal home and they've been being watched, and that's been used, unfortunately, maybe to sell images or anything like that. If the person knows, because it's obvious that now they've been caught, they're going to find ways to disconnect any way to them. And
it's a speed. You got a fuse, and as soon as that fuse is burned up, it's gone.
It's done.
Okay. What's kind of interesting about it is I on the civil side of things, I've handled a number of non-consensual pornography cases. And at one point it was just, I get what it is you have this criminal aspect, it spills over into the civil side, but then there's other rules, other laws that kind of bump up against that. So for instance, it used to be that, as part of the non-consensual pornography civil act, that you can have a court take down order that those images be taken down. But there was another code on the books that basically said, if you're going to do that, you need to post a bond, which means you need to pay money. So in essence, what it was is that the victim of somebody having their sexual images online would have to pay in order to have those things pulled down.
Wow.
Right? And ultimately, they might get the money back. But with Chris Ward, we were able to kind of make a little change. And it's one of those things to where you have 80 assembly members, 50 or 35 bills every 2 years. Some of these things, the zipper just doesn't zip up right. And so it sounds as though what this is that it's just trying to kind of reset that zipper so it kind of zips up.
And again, it just recognizes that the world has changed, since CalECPA was introduced and agreed upon.
10 years is a lot with what's going on now. Even just think about 2 years ago, right?
Right.
Where we were at and where it's going to go. And then I think a big thing is just the age of people. A 16-year-old might be able to circumvent some of these things better than a 20-year-old veteran of this sort of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. The access to technological tools is just tremendous and tremendously powerful for good or for bad.
So, and that's kind of wild to think about from the legislative aspect. So what else is going on up in Sacramento or with you and the community where you're trying to monitor all these things?
Well, the most difficult, I think, challenge that we have on this front, which is very advanced, is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, right.
And what to do about that and how to regulate it correctly to not stymie any use of the technology so that it can create advances that are important for society, but also not create harm. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges but also the best things about the job is that literally any issue you can imagine, we touch. We could pass laws, and that could be scary, but it's also very, it's what makes the job really fascinating and interesting. And if you're a lifelong learner and you like to challenge yourself, we're talking about technology, health, criminal justice, education, higher education, preschool, childcare, mental health, like literally every topic that you can think about, we deal with those issues. And so one of the biggest challenges when it comes to artificial intelligence is that, as you said earlier, a younger person may be more adept to that issue. Someone even my age, at only about to be 45, it's now I'm sort of, I have the ancient technology that I know about. I don't know what's happening. I'm barely learning about ChatGPT and all of those tools that are being utilized, and so now we have to make decisions on that, and that's what makes it difficult.
So you've got to learn. You have to become an expert in these things.
Yeah, and like you said, imagine everybody introduces 20 bills roughly. We got to become an expert in 20 different things for every person potentially.
So let me ask you this one, because if you think about it as basis, right? Like, why did you get into politics? Just generally speaking, why did you get into politics?
So I got to politics back in 2010 was my first election. And it was really about, I was growing up, and I grew up in a community with a lot of challenges. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. My siblings spent time in the criminal justice system. I got married, started to have my own family, decided to buy my home in my own neighborhood where I grew up in, which had all those challenges, high crime rates and poverty rates and all of that. And I just wanted to make sure that the family that I was going to raise was going to live in a better place. And it was very neighborhood centric thinking at that time when I first decided to run. I had my daughter by then. I said, okay, is this going to be a good place where my kids are going to be safe? Where when you call 911 for an emergency, fire is going to respond. We had at that moment had a lot of unfortunate incidents with what were called brownouts, which is fire stations were being closed and response to calls was delayed. And so that was really worrisome as a new parent. Is my child going to have a good community center to go and have after school activities? Is the library going to be open for resources? The library was very important to me growing up. After school was my middle school sort of safe place. And so all those things were services that I knew were really not happening in my community. So that's how it started. I did my time on the city council really focus on those issues. I'd actually left government for 4 years and then didn't decide to get back in until this opportunity for the assembly opened up. And then that was really about another stage of my life. I've done all that work at the neighborhood level. Now I was seeing the world from a different perspective. My children were growing. I started to think about what are their educational pathways in college and university, and what are we doing to focus in on that? Housing, and how are they going to live here, given what's happening with the cost of housing? Absolutely. So those two are big drivers for me in the work that I do today. So then what you're talking about is just like human necessity, right? Just getting by, making your life as convenient as it can. How do you go from that into, those are kind of easy sales, right? Mm-hmm. So because I'm guessing that there are other people in your neighborhood that are saying, hey, I don't like that. If there's a fire, I want the fire department to be here. Yeah. These are very right in front of you sort of issues. What are the things that you're doing either to find out from your community or to educate your community about the technology side? Because it's just so kind of out there for most people and kind of just this high level. Mm-hmm. So how are you able to kind of make that connection that you're kind of like from the roots, from the home to this sort of high level kind of law making? So we have conversations just like this, and we have town halls, and we invite people to come and learn about the work that I'm doing, and we kind of get feelers for how do people feel? Is this idea of ensuring that tracking devices and spy cameras, if you find it in your home, should we ensure that police can have access to that information immediately? And we asked those questions on that bill, on bills related to housing. Should we make it easier to build housing in every neighborhood? And which areas? On education, which kind of law should we have on the books so that kids can learn? Should we have a cell phone policy to ban cell phones or restrict the use of cell phones? Should we for kids, right? Thank you for clarifying that in schools. Should we make social media be more responsible for the kids who have access to it? And how do we do that? So this is literally conversations you have to have with the community through town halls, through coffees, from being at community fairs and listening to them. We bring forward, these are the bills that the assembly member is working on. We asked for feedback and tried all channels, as we are doing now through this, of communication so that people can hear what we're doing.
What are some of the things that you heard from your community with respect to the Trace Act?
We have a lot of people who just respond very similar to the way you did, which is, well, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense. If you find it in your own property and it's not yours, you should be able to turn that over, and police should be able to immediately do gather information, search the device to see what data is there and who has access to that data. The response has been pretty uniformly that's what people want to see. Beyond
just sort of this fear, because for me it would be a fear and anxiousness about it, right? Because it's like, hey, what is this? What is this? Somebody tracking me? Is somebody tracking my kids?
Right.
But have you heard of any stories from people that this has actually happened?
Yeah, so I had a staff member of mine who it happened to, and she was on a train ride from Sacramento to Los Angeles, and she said that she kept getting a notification on her phone that there's this device, and she just sort of
her phone was picking it up.
Yeah, because when something's nearby, your phone, and I've never actually used an AirTag myself, so I don't know exactly what it says in terms of what device is following you, but she kept getting the notification because the device was on her and her phone was on her, and it was trying to connect. And so,
are you kidding me?
Yeah, and so she had that all the way down, and then when she found it, she said she didn't know what to do with it. She said she called her family and asked, and she just threw it away because she didn't know what else to do, so that it wouldn't be on her anymore. But yeah, it must have been slipped somewhere on the train station on her way there.
What's so scary about that is because you just don't know, was I a target? Or did it just happen to be here?
Right.
Was it just somebody inadvertently just dropped it in there?
Yeah.
And so from my perspective as the attorney, what I look at that is it's an invasion of privacy. And it's hard to kind of get your mind around that, right? Okay, you're on a train. You're going from Sacramento down the coast of California, or down California to Los Angeles, but yet it's somebody who is entering your space. And I think that's the big stuff with this digital thing. And so I think from what I hear from what you're saying, and the sort of the connection I can make is the same sort of concerns, the same sort of human everyday concerns you have can relate to this kind of wild Star Trek sort of of technology that's going on.
Yeah.
And just like this invasion of privacy, and I've handled a few cases with invasion of privacy, and what happens with people is that it's just consistently what I hear is, whenever they walk into a room, they think, is somebody looking at me? Is this, because this sort of fear, this anxiety comes over it, simply because somebody did something and you can't do anything about that.
And so the trauma remains.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then most people don't recognize how prevalent that trauma is. And so what I see with this is it removes that this happened and I can't do anything about it. Right? From what you're telling me, this is my take, is that you can do something about it.
Right.
And so then, but again, it's like you're saying, it's if you were to take a poll right now, how many people out there in your district and throughout California would understand or know that there was these protections put in place 10 years ago?
Yeah, they wouldn't know.
They wouldn't know.
Yeah.
And then, so they're not necessarily going to know. It makes sense that, hey, yeah, you're right. It's on my property. They abandoned it. It should be mine. I should be able to do something with it. But so what, if anything, are you doing or can you do to kind of educate your people?
Yeah, so we are making sure that people know what the work we're doing. And we obviously are working for with the some of the advocates and some of the district attorney's office to make sure that people know that this is actually unfortunately happening. We just heard some story, not heard, reported. We saw, unfortunately, it was happening in El Cajon recently. It was in the local news station that this is something that's been happening there. And so, unfortunately, it happens more and more. And I think that's one of the things that we can use these moments of, we're trying to change the law, but education is also really important because you just have to be, unfortunately, you just have to be more aware. You have to look around.
And, one of the big things, I spent a lot of my time, I'm a contingency fee attorney, right? So I don't get paid by the hour. I don't send bills. I don't send invoices. I must say that 1,000 times a day because I'm trying to tell people that. But what that enables me to do is to educate people, right? So I tell people, call me, ask your questions. And finally, essentially, what I've decided is that I'm an educator.
Right.
I want to educate you with what's going on because I'm the one who's going to see these sort of things. And I'm the one who can kind of tell you what's going on. What are your rights? If I don't know what something is, I can help you find where to go and who to talk to. So in this case, who are some of the advocates? With groups, people that are helping you out with this one?
Yeah, so we want to make it clear that if you find yourself in that situation, that you feel confident that if you turn over the information, that those who are there to serve and protect us, law enforcement, is going to be able to be responsive to you first and foremost.
Yeah.
That's really the key. We want to make sure that people have that certainty. We don't want, the last thing we want is people to say, well, no one can do anything about it.
Yes.
That's the worst part.
Yeah. So, so now with everything that's going on in the world today, you've got kind of some wrinkles going on there, right? So certain folks trying to trust law enforcement. How do you make that connection? How do you tell somebody who says that they're fearful, hey, I might get deported, or they may look at me, if I'm the victim, am I going to be looked at as somebody who's causing problems?
Yeah.
How are we able to convince people to speak out in those situations?
Well, one of the things that we've done, and we got to remind ourselves of California Values Act in California, which is, and also, if you're a victim of a crime, just generally you're protected. And that's really important. It's a message that you're right. These days, we had done a lot of work to get people to that point, to feel comfortable with that. And now, unfortunately, because what's happening in our country in particular, people are concerned. And I have to say, unfortunately, they're genuine concerns, right? Like what is going to happen. But that continues to be the case. What we've done in our community, for example, at church, we had the sheriff's office, the police department come, and after Mass, they stayed on a Sunday, and they were given the opportunity to talk about why it's important that they still communicate when there's a crime. And they heard it directly from people in uniform, from the sheriff's office, from the police department. And that's just more education that unfortunately we're going to have to continue to do. And
so one of the things I'd like to leave people with is that from your take on things, right? So I know what I would say is that if somebody has a question, you can think of me as the protector, right? When you come into the office, whether it's through the phone, Zoom, or physically there, I got my arms around you, and I'm the one to protect you. And so I can be your voice over that wall of protection, right? But I certainly can't do that for everybody. But so what sort of advice would you give to somebody who either has been a victim of a crime like this, who as a family member is concerned about what's going on? So for instance, other parents of children, of high schoolers, what is it that you can say to give them some confidence of either what person or organization to go to help them so that they feel protected and getting their voice heard?
Yeah, I think, again, as this bill intends to do, this law intends to do, making sure that law enforcement has all the tools so that they can have your back, and working with them, and crime victims groups as well. And there are, unfortunately, domestic violence victims often find themselves with this situation of tracking and spying. And those groups also obviously are there for support. And so those are all the types of the Family Justice Center here in San Diego. We happen to have that. Those are the types of places where and people who you can go to ensure. But once again, if you do think you're a victim of this, it's got to be reported.
Yeah, and kind of what it sounds like to me is that even though we've talked a little bit about, but even though you have these high-level sort of wild technological things, people dropping AirPods, it still comes down to a community. It still comes down to feeling a sense of security, and it still comes down to trust.
Yeah.
and you have to trust someone around you and just hope that they will help you and do something. But you also have to have the legal tools in order to get there.
Yeah.
And it sounds as though this might be one of those little fixes.
We got to fix this to make sure those legal tools exist. And like you said, it's about trust, which, as you know, is difficult to build with people.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot easier to lose it.
Yes.
And so our job is to continue to provide information so that people do feel trustworthy, that there is a process that can work for them.
Well, and I like that you say that because, trust takes a lot to be built. But if you're a trustworthy person and your heart is in the right place and you work hard towards it, it's easy to show somebody that, right? Yeah. It may take a while to get there, but it's easy to show somebody because your actions will speak louder than your words on that.
And that's, I think that's very true for the work you do, and it's very true for the work that I do.
Oh, absolutely.
It's very easy. In fact, there might be the two professions where people are the most untrustworthy, or at least, I was just talking to somebody yesterday who I think, because I've built trust with, we were talking about an issue about housing that they happen to just disagree with me on. Yeah. I am a big proponent of building more and making sure we have, for their future generations, a place for them to live. It's been years of a relationship, and I think, again, very opposed to my view on that. But because of the trust and knowing that the work that I do is focused on serving the community, I think we were able to sort of just say we agree to disagree on this, but the relationship continues.
It's all relationships.
Yeah.
Well, so to kind of finish it out, what are the next steps for the Trace Act?
Yeah, so it's now been out of the Assembly. It went out of the committees. It was voted by the full Assembly. It's over on the Senate now. And so the Senate needs to go through their committee process. They will review it. I'm sure they will suggest more changes. That's what happens. And then ultimately the Senate will vote for this. And if they do, then we will send it over to the governor for his signature or veto.
It'll get signed, and then January 26th?
It becomes law January next year.
Okay. Well, David, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here, and always it's good to see you and talk with you.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks now. Now it's time for the Myths and Facts segment of our podcast, where we separate truth from fiction. There's a lot of information out there, and not all of it is accurate. So we're here to set the record straight with real facts from your trusted attorney. Let's get to them. Let's start with the first one. Myth. If you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. Fact. Privacy is a right, not a privilege. People have a legal and moral expectation to control their personal data, regardless of guilt or innocence. Myth. Law enforcement can already access any phone if it's important enough. Fact. In many cases, even high-priority investigations get stalled due to encryption, lack of consent, or the time it takes to obtain a warrant. The system isn't always nimble enough for urgent cases. Myth. Only criminals care about digital privacy. Fact. Everyday people are increasingly impacted. Victims of stalking, abuse, or identity theft often need legal access to devices for protection or justice, not secrets. Myth. All digital tracking is obvious and easy to find. Fact. Modern tracking devices can be hidden, passive, and difficult to detect. Many victims don't realize they're being followed until it's too late. Myth. Giving police more access means giving up all privacy. Fact. Thoughtfully written laws can expand access in narrow emergency-related situations without opening the door to blanket surveillance. Balance is possible and necessary. And that wraps up this episode of Unseen Impact. A big thanks to you, Assemblymember David Alvarez, for helping us unpack what the Trace Act means. Not just for lawyers and law enforcement, but for families, victims, and communities trying to navigate a digital world. If this episode got you thinking about your own rights, your privacy, or how the law should keep pace with technology, good. That's the point. If you like today's episode, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review or your questions if you have any. For more stories or information on legal-related topics, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Rory Law Firm. You can also learn more about our work or book a free consultation with us at rorylaw.com. I'm Rory Pendergast from Rory Law. Thank you for joining me.